I wanted to introduce you, but I first have to say a little anecdote, and that is that when we first moved to Wisconsin in '91, my husband and I drove down the most diverse street in Madison and thought, wow, not as bad as we thought. This is really pretty good. And we drove a couple of years later when we were going to get, I think, my mother-in-law at Milwaukee Airport. I remember driving along and seeing your mural that's at 6th and National, I believe.
Oh, yes. It's called...
See it from 94. And again, it was that kind of thing. We're not isolated. We're not the only ones here. And I think that kind of reaction is absolutely the kind of thing that you have set up in Milwaukee and beyond, where you really, your art has become part of Milwaukee. It's not so much that it's sitting there on its own. It really seems to be a part of the city itself, and both in terms of reflection and in terms of a way to create identity for the community. I know that you also have done other things. Speaking of day jobs, I believe you've also been a courtroom artist, which was fascinating to me. And you do caricatures, is that right? And
yeah, professionally for large corporations.
Yeah.
So me and my children, we work together in doing it. We
Really?
travel the state working in Madison for like all the big corporations in Madison when they have their yearly end parties and summer parties. We go there and draw the employees. So it's a good gig.
I bet. And how great to do it with the kids, huh?
Yeah, it is. We're still working together. Not all of them. I have 6 children, but like 4 of them at the most are artists.
Wow. Well, I'm going to turn it over to you, and the standard warning is that I will hold up a 5-minute warning sign at the end. I find it easier than that to just bring myself back on screen, and so when you see me next, that'll be the time to kind of head into questions and answers. I'll try not
I just had a question now. Is Benny going to put the visuals up?
Yes, Benny is going to put the visuals up. Thank goodness that Benny is running this place. So.
All right. So what's going to happen? I'll let him put it up and I'll explain it. We'll wing it.
Okay.
Okay.
Hey, Reynaldo, the screen should be showing. Can you see the screen all right?
Yeah, I see the illustrations, yes.
Awesome. All right, so they're up and everybody can.
Okay. So let me know when I talk or the moderator introduces me, right?
Yep, I think you're ready to go now.
Oh, I just say hello and start going?
You say hello and start going. I already talked at you.
Right.
So.
Okay, buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Reynaldo Hernández. Many people know me by being a Milwaukee muralist, but today I'm going to show you that I travel throughout the state and I have murals in some of the islands in the Caribbean. So it's not just Milwaukee. So those that are listening, that are students and those that are teachers, poets, dancers, other muralists, artists, I'll try to have a little bit of everything. And then at the end, you can ask questions to fill in. And I'm looking at some of the work I've done. So I've been an illustrator, been all types of art. I was born as an artist. I don't know if my mother, I tell people I was born with a pencil in my hand, but that's really not true. But when I was young, I was advanced in art and I thought everybody was an artist. So it was natural for me. And because of that, I went to high school and took commercial art as training. And that's your foundation. I figured that being a commercial art, I can last and make a living at art instead of just being a fine artist doing watercolors and selling at festivals. You could do commercial things. And that's what I did. And then from high school, I got into, well, working in high school, I went to a boys' high school, boys' technical high school, and they placed you in the real world in your field. So I took commercial art, and I also took printing. So I ended up working my way into Channel 4, WCLAC TV, and television. To me, that was show business in Milwaukee and Wisconsin. That's the biggest thing to Hollywood or show business. And so from there, what happens, you work in one place. After a while, if you're an artist, you don't want to live and die in the same place. That's how I felt. I was in the art department, worked there for over 12 years, and I don't want to live and die in one place working for advertising clients all my life. And so murals is freedom. You're your own boss. You're not enclosed in the building. You're out in the world. You're out on the walls. You're out. It's free. You're breathing the air. So that's how I got into murals. A friend of mine in high school, he knew a person that was opening a nightclub. And I don't know if later on when the visual show, I'll stop and show you what it is. But that's how I got into the business. And from working at Channel 4, I was a courtroom sketch artist at the station. They would pull me out of the art department, go with the news department, and go downtown and cover local trials. And also, after a while, it was just federal trials in federal court. So I covered some famous trials. When I was young, I covered the bombing in Madison, and they had that trial way up in Canada. One of the people that did the bombing, he escaped, and he was caught in Canada. So I had to go with the news department, fly all the way into Canada and draw in their courtroom. So it's an exciting life for me. Hard part is people don't pose for you like a portrait. They're moving around, the lawyers, and you also get to see the good and the ugly of the justice system. People's lives are at stake, and lawyers are talking to each other afterwards. And I would see, wow, this is how it goes. But I covered some trials that were famous, like the 1975 Milwaukee school desegregation trial. That was a landmark case. And then there was 1984, I covered the extortion trial, alleged Milwaukee mafia bosses, Frank Balistreri trial. In 2007, I covered the federal trial of Milwaukee police officers accused of beating Frank Jude, as you see in the upper right-hand corner. And then there was trials with aldermen and politicians. One of the last trials I covered was he was a hacker, international hacker that was caught in Las Vegas, but they had the trial in federal court in Milwaukee. That was kind of strange. But then a couple months later after the trial, this person was on the cover of Wired magazine. So that was pretty good. So I got to cover trials. Because of the pandemic, it slowed down. I haven't covered trials for a while, but that's court. So to cover trials and draw people, you have to study anatomy. And so I did a lot of training from high school, even before. When I was little, I learned how to read before I went to school from my mother. She's also an inspiration for me. My mother, when I was real small, she told me I had a God-given talent and I shouldn't waste it. And so I've been keeping up and doing the best I can in art. She was my inspiration. So let's see what else we have. But so there, from courtroom sketching, and my children grew up in art. They helped me with all the murals I've done, and they've learned character art. So we work together. We do like major corporations when they have their picnics and parties. We travel around the state, Lake Geneva, Madison, up north, Green Bay. We covered the Packers. We drew the Milwaukee Bucks team back when Giannis first came to Milwaukee. So you get to meet some interesting people along the way. So there's some pictures of it. Some of those, the dogs in the middle, that's Pet Fest that we had a couple of months ago. It was at the Summerfest grounds. People treat their pets as if they're their own children, dress them up. So it's kind of fun. So this is what I'm doing. And so all this shut down when in the end of 2019 and all of 2020, I lost all my jobs because we have agents that hire us. They're called entertainment agents. And so the industry was cut down. It's been pretty rough. Now it's finally coming out of it. So that's good. So, and there we go. This is a collage of some of the murals that I've done. There's stories for each one. So I don't know if we can pinpoint it. You see the eagle flying? That was on, yeah, right there. That was done in the early 80s and on the south side of Milwaukee. And so these jobs, to get the work, you either have to have somebody sponsor or pay for it. Sometimes it's the city itself, and a lot of times it's the school district. This was by the city of Milwaukee, the county of Milwaukee. They owned the property, and they just told me it had to be of social issues. Across the street on the top in the middle, that was a social issue. Back in the early 80s, it was racism. It's still an issue in 2021, 22. So we still have the same problem. So I try to use symbolisms, not to use real violent portrayal, but more passive, but also using symbols like the eagle and the two kids representing the races and the hands folding. In spite of that, there was still there's a story. You still had to have, people didn't like the image of a person of color on their side of town. And they would threaten me, and we had to have police patrolling. We had high school students. So what I do when I work with students on one side of town, I try to mix it up. We had students from the west side, east side, high school students, south side. So they got to interact with other students of different nationalities and cultures. So that's part of the social issue of doing murals. In fact, that's where murals came from protest and back in the late 60s, from the civil rights era in Chicago. And we had riots here in Milwaukee in 1968, I remember. And so that's where it's called art, it's street art, really, art in the street. So you can show your pride and your aspirations, your problems on the walls so people can read it. Instead of going to galleries for elitist people, that the everyday person can walk by and decipher what it's showing. Very good. My most famous one is right in the middle. You can see the eagle and dove. So from commercial art and learning art theory, you learn about contrast and colors. And also that was right off of a freeway. When you come from Chicago, you go to Milwaukee, you go over the high rise, they call it, to downtown Milwaukee. And that's on 6th and National in Milwaukee. And it's on the right side of the freeway. So you drive past it. So the psychology was, I was afraid of people, if you do a certain type of mural that's real busy, people would try to figure out what it is while they're driving. And you only have I timed it 11 seconds when you first saw that building to where you drive past it. So I use large contrasting images and symbols. And so when you do a mural, a lot of times you get, you have to work with a theme. Like the mural on the mural to the right of that was in the school in Fort Atkinson. And that was called a welcoming mural. We have the word welcome in different languages. And that's the curriculum of the school that they studied. We put it on the wall right outside the office. And right below, you see some of my artist children, Rosalia, Marisa, and Liana. Now they're married. Rosalia Singh, Marisa Duent, and Liana Flores. My son, Reynaldo Hernández, he's also a muralist. My older son, Ruben, he's helped me with murals. So my children, since infancy, they grew up in art. And then when they get old enough, they can decide what they want to do with their lives, and they have other jobs, but they still do art. And that's the way I was raised up. My mother was an artist, but she was raised in the dance art. She was a tap dancer when she was small. She was so talented, she was going to be on the Apollo Theater, but back in the day, her mother wouldn't let her, real strict. And then later on, she learned flamenco dance from Jose Greco and Nana Lorca, which were famous flamenco dancers that were in movies back in the 50s. And so she was trained with the best. And my wife, Migdalia, and my mother were trained by Nana Lorca. So we have an art family. My mother's brother was Willie Pickens, raised in Milwaukee, but he made famous in Chicago as a jazz pianist. And he was a famous pianist. He played for the inaugurations of Clinton and Obama. And his children were babysitters for Obama's children. So we have a small world here in Milwaukee and Wisconsin. When I grew up, Milwaukee was kind of like a little complex. We were smaller in Chicago. So I looked to Chicago for inspiration. There weren't a lot of muralists in Milwaukee at the time when I was a teenager. There was one artist that I remember that helped me. Carlos Rosas was probably the most famous muralist. Then I came on. Now there's a whole explosion of murals, but that wasn't always the case. So I went to the Chicago mural groups, and they banded together their muralists. And then I looked to LA. So you're in Wisconsin, the Midwest. So back in the 70s and 60s, I would look to like the artists. Back in the 70s, LA was like the mural capital of the United States, Hollywood. And so they had a publication called Public Art Review back, and I could see what's going on in LA and see what their muralists were. And they had articles on how public art inspires and public art informs. So that's how I got my education. You couldn't really study mural art in schools or in colleges. There was no course on it. I study on my own because it's part of my culture. And so from public art I'll just read a paragraph. Public art documents our place and time by visually rendering issues, ideas, traditions, and history through symbols, signs, and images. It identifies and comments on the challenges that affect us. Public art can be a mirror we hold up to ourselves and a reflection of ourselves that we present to the outside. Unlike work displayed in museums and galleries, public art is a shared and common experience. So that's why I wanted to really get out in the streets. So once you do a mural, like the one with Eagle, the advertisement it would get in the newspapers. A lot of times on the cover in color. You can't pay for that kind of advertising. So I work from city to city. I've done murals in Kenosha, Racine, Wisconsin Rapids, Stevens Point, numerous cities. And I got to see different perceptions of the state of Wisconsin, school districts, and what they taught and how they interacted, and students. So you get an education through art, but you have to keep on with your craft. You can't stop yet. So everything that you see inspires you, and so you learn just visual artists. But you also learn rhythm from music and dance. That's all incorporated into the art form. So let's see what else we got, Benny. Oh, so this is how there's myself. A gallery exhibit I had during the pandemic, which got me inspired and back working again at the UCC, United Community Center in Milwaukee. The work, and my teenage years, my brother and I, we were like young teenagers, and that was when there was the hippie days and Woodstock and the psychedelic era, and we did posters. From high school, we learned how to silk screen. We had a whole semester of silk screening. So we made our own screens and printed black light posters. And we were little kids, but we got notoriety. We got connected with they had a lot of shops head shops, they called them, and poster shops and mural shops throughout, San Francisco. So my posters were throughout the United States, and those are some of them. So that was interesting. So I did fine art. So the fine art things you can incorporate into your mural art, but you have to. I studied also chemistry, how the acrylic paint, how it could stick to the wall, and how to make it adhere, and how to make mixtures, how acrylic paint has polymers and monomers. I learned all that. So you really can get deep into it, but it pays off later if you want your longevity of your artwork. So yes. So jump in there, Jan, if you have any.
Okay. I do have to say that I had not realized before I did some research and saw the collection that Roberto had offered for in terms of murals in posters purchase, that you were the artist of some of the most iconic posters of my entire generation. And I'm totally serious about that. I was pulling up pictures of your psychedelic era posters, but I know that one. So I love the fact that you were always doing art that was accessible for people. What are you up to next? Do you have another a project in the works? Do you have what's your next step?
I'm in love with all different types of art, like we said. So we made posters, not just the psychedelic posters, but in 1982, when the Milwaukee Brewers were going to win the championship, me and my family, we made T-shirts that we silk screened. Instead of on paper, we did it on shirts. And we were all ready to go and make money. And then they lost the World Series. It crashed. Then in the 70s, the Milwaukee Bucks were making it into the higher. We thought they were going to win a championship. And we had Kareem. So I made a poster with Kareem, and I had Oscar Robertson, all the Milwaukee Bucks on a large poster. So this time when the Bucks were in the playoffs, I dug in the archives and found that poster and put it online. And me and my daughters, my children, we got to, when Jason Kidd, he was the coach, we got to meet Giannis and all the players. And we did an art thing. It was sponsored by Palermo's Pizza. And so we designed a pizza box along with the players in one evening. And then we had see who did the best one. So it was so you get to do interesting things. Did a mural in a home for like children that were in trouble in Racine called Taylor Home. And that was funded $10,000 by Oprah Winfrey. So we put her on the mural, and I had to work with, these kids were roughnecks that, came out as, they were too rough to be in regular schools. So they put them in this home. And you have to use psychology when you do murals. They didn't want to, here I am, they were supposed to help cooperate with me and work on it. They refused because, I'm not doing that. So I just started doing it myself, and then they slowly got into it. You have to use psychology. Doing murals, I worked with rival gangs in Milwaukee, and the one you saw off the freeway on 7th and North Avenue. And that was in the 80s when Milwaukee finally recognized the city itself that there was a gang problem. So what did they do? They hired artists. There was a half a dozen of artists like ourselves working in different areas with gangs. I also did the same thing on the south side of Milwaukee with the Latin Kings and Cobras. So it's not easy. And so like that, sometimes I had to hire I call them a bouncer. So when I'm working, they could keep the peace, and I don't have to watch my back. They would do it, and it works out. But it's a good, you get to see really education, not just in school, but on the streets. Some of the students that worked on these projects, they ended up, when I worked in UW system in Stout, I was up there doing a art conference, and one of the girls ran out. She recognized me from doing the mural on 7th and North back in the 80s. Now she's going to college. So those are success stories that you see. So it's interesting.
We have a question that's been submitted. Do you think that murals should be touched up over time as they age, or just left as they are?
Yeah, the mural, I think it depends on the mural. And it depends on, like I said, how you prepare the wall. Back in the day, the average life of mural was 10 years. Then if they have better materials and mural, what happens, you can sell the building and then it's gone. But if you're smart like me and you study law and international copyright law, they really can't. That's what happened to the mural on 6th and National. The building was in foreclosure and the city of Milwaukee had the building. Then they wanted to put it back in the tax base, you know, so they sold it to a developer in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And they wanted to open up where my mural was. That's the one with the eagle and dove. They wanted to put 12 like picture windows so they could make more money by having big giant wall, sealing the wall picture windows and cut it out of the mural. But they couldn't do it and they couldn't sell it to the developers until I agreed, because according to copyright law, they own the building, but I own that image because it's so, if it's so famous, it's a famous image, kind of like the Hollywood sign. So we negotiated, and when they cut the mural, I painted and disguised it, and we put, there's ways to do it to make it look well. So we still have the mural there. So that's, and then the mural on 7th and North, where I worked with Commando Project kids in 1984 with the gang problem. That was retouched in 2015, and you have to have somebody pay for it, and it finally worked. So then working on that, I worked with some of the students when they were like in 6th grade when they helped me paint the original. Now they're adults and they're muralists themselves, some of them, and they help paint on and restore that mural. And it was interesting. So when I restore and do murals, and some of the comments from the community are, some are humorous, some are like, you know, sad, but it was amazing. So I'm working, fixing that mural, and there's one person came by and they handed me $100 bills because they just liked what I'm doing to fix up the community. And back then we couldn't hug, so I had to give a shoulder thing. Then he went back on the freeway. Then there was another person, I wrote down what he said. He was African-American adult male. He came up to me, so we're working on scaffolding. And here's what he said. He said, well, man, it's been a long time. He said, I've been in jail for 14 years. And when I got out, this mural was the first thing I saw that was still here. He said, everything else was gone. So Milwaukee changed the buildings, but this mural is still there.
The murals are still there.
Yeah, so it's a landmark. So
it's history. It becomes part of the city. I hate ending these conversations because I always feel like we could go for quite a bit longer, but we are about to head into our lunch break, which if we were meeting in person would genuinely be a lunch break. But as you all either take a break at home or stay in front of your computer, we will be playing some videos and showing some images from some of our presenters, and we are very grateful for that. And we will rejoin at 11:30, where we'll have Monica Cliff is on Teatro Enya, who's going to speak about Teatro Enya, and Tony Baez will be speaking about his work in terms of music. So thank you very, very much, Reynaldo. I appreciate it. And
yeah. So we're going to take a lunch break, huh?
Yeah.
Like we say, we work for food.
That's right. Yes, we do.
We're online.
That's right. Thank you very much.